Hello, Pearl. How are you?
Hi, I'm really well,
This
really well.
this is the first time that I've had a live conversation with someone kind of literally on the other side of the world. So this is a new experience for me.
Myself also.
And the wonderful thing about it is that we kind of connected through a poem I wrote. I had no idea, I was alone writing these words 20 years ago now, and
Wow.
that they could connect to someone, on the other side of the world, which I kind of take a lot of heart from that. It speaks a little bit to the universality, I guess, of the human spirit. That if we can tap into something via art, that we can reach someone on the other side of
Mm.
the world. Um, so, I just want to thank
And
you.
and even as that goes, mm, oh, I was just gonna say, even as that goes, I cannot even remember where I found your poem. Like it must have only been in the past um, 2 to 3 months, and I must have just stumbled across it and resonated so deeply with it. So it's wonderful that to find out that that was written. It felt so present for me.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you is how you encountered the poem. I did write it in the spring of the year 2000, 20 years
Mm,
ago. It's hard to believe. But it was a poem that over the years, it got kind of shared a little bit early on. It appeared in my first book in 2008. And the National Public Radio show, The Writer's Almanac, shared it shortly thereafter in June of 2008. And so, in the rudimentary of world of the internet, in the budding social media, there it did get shared a little bit. So it got out, I guess, a little bit. And over the years, I've gotten some, or really more than any other poem I've ever written,
mm,
feedback from people who have found it and found that it spoke to
mm,
them in some way. I've heard from people who were in prison, um, who found the poem spoke to them in some comforting way. Over time, I heard from someone one time who had been recovering from surgery and felt that the poem resonated with them. And even just this last January, I heard from someone who had survived a terrible forest fire in Paradise, California
mm.
here. And of course, I know I'm speaking to someone in Australia now, and you have immediate experience with terrible fires
Completely.
here too. Who also said that the poem resonated with him. And so I knew that it was speaking to people in different circumstances who felt isolated in some way, or in a put into a situation of stasis. And of course, having heard that over a few years, sometime in March, I said to my wife one evening, not in any hopeful way, but in kind of a matter of fact way, I wouldn't be surprised if Things to Do kind of goes viral. And before I knew it, I found people sharing it on Facebook, and that's probably how it found its way to you, I think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I'm not sure how it actually happened, but I know that when I found the poem, I run a kind of an internet space called Quiet Space for my work actually, and it's kind of pastoral care, giving people a space to rest. And I had found that poem in maybe my searching for content for that.
Yeah.
I made it up into a little like I put a picture of a whale and I put your words and I just shared it with that group. But it really stuck with me and I really felt like it was very potent. It I then shared that with my minister. So I'm a part of the Uniting Church of Australia. She had been planning to do a reading around the book of Job and around like this sense of holding and being in the belly of the whale. And so we actually went, let's animate this. She said, do you want to animate it? And I went, oh yeah, sure, I can figure that out. I'm a paper artist. So I have all of the bits here.
Oh,
Yeah. Um so I have all of the bits from the art piece. that I then animated in 700 photographs.
Wow.
But I think that one of the reasons that it did speak to me, and as you spoke about all the different examples of people that found your poem, I fractured my spine I fractured the top of my skull in December.
Oh,
So
no.
my lockdown started early and I've actually, I'm only recently out of my neck brace. So I've had quite the journey starting my lockdown early. So I found that I had actually become accustomed to being in the belly of the whale myself. Everyone's going off to work. I'm at home. I'm painting. I'm making art. I'm keeping myself productive and distracted because I was quite bound to home. Then when the COVID lockdown started to happen, I felt that there was a lot of anxiety and distress in the world about what do we do while we're home. And I thought that your poem really had a real settling effect of like, we just need to wait. And I felt that because I'd already been in that belly, that I had that I could keep that quiet momentum in a way of helping people just breathe, we can just be here. And I just loved your listing of let's think about all the things we can do.
There's a moment in the poem, the speaker says, be grateful you're here where you can rest and wait. I think that a lot of people respond to that line. But the idea of being grateful in an unfortunate circumstance, can seem very strange. But in a lot of ways, desperate circumstances can open our eyes to things we're blind to all the time. It feels like,
Completely.
There's a little quote from the filmmaker David Lynch. He one time talked about how when he was at the very bottom of his career and was absolutely broke and desperate, felt like he had no hope. He said the world was so beautiful from down there because everything was up above him and everything was, and when we feel like we're in something of a hopeless situation, there's also, it seems like, an opportunity there to see all of the possibilities that might be there.
Completely.
Before, yeah.
Yes, and I think that was the experience of being in a neck brace and my fracture. It was a cycling accident, by the way. Yeah. But I definitely, there was this resting pause for me in my life, and that sense of in the words around that before that I was treading water, we were all treading water anyway. There was not this before, before this sense of being in that belly, it's not like we were any more found or had any idea of what we were doing. We were just busier and more active and more anxious about what we were doing. Now we have to sit with all of that. And I found a complete sense of surrender and real beauty in that, because as you say, everything was above me and my neck was like this. So I could only look up. Yeah. So I think that speaks so much to that in that way as well.
Let me say, I'm was very sorry to hear that you had a traumatic accident, but very happy that your neck brace is removed, and it seems that you're well on your way to full recovery, if not there.
Yes, everything's going really well. And as you can see, I'm in my happiest place, and I have been. It gave me 9 weeks of work to really get back to my art school, all of my passions, all of the things that really, really light me up. I, in the past few years, have trained, and I'm an art therapist. And there's always a kind of a balancing act between my own art practice and what that entails, and actually being an art therapist and bringing that to other people therapeutically. sometimes it's really nice just to step away from that service and coming back to just what it means for me to make art. And, you know, the success that this small animation had was kind of really a testament to, you know, there are things that we can put out into the world that bring people that sense of, I guess, all of those things that art therapy entails, but actually it's coming from just my voice and out into the world.
That's amazing. I love everything you just said. And you started off by saying you're in your happiest place. And I think as artists, I mean, I so resonate with that. You're happiest when you're doing the work. And doing the work is an absolutely lonely type of thing when you're doing it, but it's a good kind of loneliness, a good kind of aloneness. The American poet Elizabeth Bishop from the 20th century, she said that what we want from art is the same thing necessary for its production, which is a self-forgetful, perfectly useless concentration. She said that in a letter, and isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? And to just for
that is so perfect.
Yeah, and for non-artists, audience members who hear that, let me just say that the word useless there is not equating to the word worthless. It is simply meaning it has no utilitarian end. It is simply your concentration is just totally absorbed in the idea of making something that might, you know, stand outside of yourself. You know, it's so beautiful. And then to hear you say that while also saying that you work in art therapy, which of course privileges the recipient of the art, not just the artist. So that while the artist is in the world of self-forgetful concentration and alone, the artist's ultimate goal is not solipsism or self-indulgence, right? That ultimately, I think what we're doing is always, if at least I believe this, true art is necessarily empathetic. You know, it's a giving to others, so that ultimately the value it has to
completely. And there's a connection space between that that I find in my own art, is connecting internally with myself and then with the wider community, and then something that's happening in art therapy as well, that there's the internal reaching in, quiet space, and also the expression out and connecting with a larger community that that helps people find agency in the world. And this sense of quietness, well, actually, in terms of the word quiet, I love the word quiet. I'm not generally like I live quite a bright, colorful life, but the best way, like if someone says, "How are you today?" If I can say, "I'm feeling quiet," that is like I'm here and I'm present. And it's something often, my partner's an oil painter, and it's something often we will, you know, "How are you?" "Oh, I'm quiet." And that means I'm ready to make art. I'm ready to engage. I'm ready to not worry about what I'm making or the output, the money, all of the social elements that come into our world. If I can be quiet, it bypasses all of that.
That brings me to something I wanted to ask you about too. I think I shared with you at least one or more of other videos that people have made in the last couple of months about this poem. It's just so strange. There have been 3 others that have come to my attention. And they're all beautiful in their own way. This wonderful Iranian artist made a wonderful one that had a similar kind of feel to yours, but it was like pencil drawings rather than.
Yes, I did enjoy that.
But all 3 of the others featured vocal renderings of the poem, you know, and the thing that I love them all. I think they're wonderful. There's even a sock puppet one that's very funny, where the sock puppet is reciting the poem. And I think they're all wonderful in their own way, and I'm flattered in my own way by people making that and helping the poem reach to people, of course. but I'm always most moved by yours. And I think part of it is that there's that beautiful music, the beautiful piano
Mm.
and you engage with the words visually. Um, you
Mhm.
read the poem with the eyes like you might encounter it in a book while hearing the score for it. And there's something just haunting about that, and it is the way it captures that sense of while you're receiving words, you're still in that realm of quiet. I think your video quite captures that.
I think, yeah, thank you so much, Dan. I think that that was really a lot of the feedback I got from it, from quite a lot of people, both on the YouTube and also kind of reaching out to me personally, were people that said, I could feel myself breathing. I was aware of myself in it, and I slowed down to the pace of it,
Yeah.
which I think is so lovely because we are so caught up in the world, and we're so in um we are in control of the pace that we read at often. So it's like, oh, here's a poem, I'll skim read it, and then I'll get on to the next thing. And I don't think I intentionally meant for it to actually, I didn't have a huge amount of intentions at the start of it. I wanted to animate your poem.
That's great.
And I think that the pace that it came at was, well, I needed to make it slow enough to read. And that I really wanted to be an invitation into the pauses that I wanted to create. And I think it speaks to, it must be something I'm very, very interested in, because my final year, I studied at the College of Fine Arts in Sydney. And my final year, I took a video subject, and I really wasn't very interested in it at all. But my final piece was typing, and so screen filming, typing out the words to an Edna St. Vincent Millay poem, God's World, 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 I cannot hold you close enough. And I just typed those words out at the pace that I thought people should read them. And then I projected that up onto a entire wall of leaves I had pinned up onto a gallery wall.
Mm.
So there must be something in me that wants to help people connect to the slowness of reading in a very visual, embodied way. It's good to know. Good to know about myself. Sometimes we don't realize these things until we're piecing them together in our own art practice.
Yeah, that the pauses that you have in the phrasing of the poem, you really were sensitive to some kind of internal implicit syntactical pauses that are there. They're not necessarily represented by the poem's line breaks. The poem does have line breaks. It's a long lined poem, but some people, because it's so long lined, have assumed it's a prose poem, and it's not. I mean, there are deliberate line breaks there, but a lot of enjambment. And a lot of times there's this implicit pause that when I would read it aloud, I would pause in the middle of a line, because I think syntactically it called for it in a way that isn't cued by the typing. But you were catching on those phrases very much in the way you were delivering it in chunks.
Which is interesting because I actually, look, I'm over here in Melbourne. We hadn't met. I didn't ask permission to use your poem. I was
It's
doing
fine.
this little church. Yeah, thank you. Doing this little church project. I put it up on YouTube specifically so I could share it with some people. I didn't, and so in a way, I actually felt that responsible for those words, and it wasn't a collaboration that you and I had gone, okay, so this is what we're going to do, this is what the poet wants out of it, this is what the paper artist. And so I actually printed it out. There was a very embodied sense, like, because I cut all those words out and I fiddled around with them and I laid them out. So I went over and over those words. That animation is over 700 photographs. So
Amazing.
yeah, so there was an element of like ownership in a way of like, okay, here's this line. How am I going to visually, like each line was this like, okay, how do I get someone into that? Okay, you know, how do I visually represent that? One of my favorite parts is the part with the cookies, with the biscuits, because it was like, you know, imagine all the things that you have done. And it was like eating the cookie and could have done, and there's more cookies. But there was just a sense of running around my house and scrambling up paper and breaking rulers, and just how to viscerally bring people into your words and taking poetic license with those pauses.
Yeah, that's great. You know, you talked about not coming into it with intentionality as to how you were going to do it when you started it, and us not collaborating on it, and the author not kind of trying to impose a vision on it. I think that's so also kind of inherent in good art making, which is not knowing what point B is at the end. When you
Yeah.
point A, you know, you have to allow for discovery from point A to point B. I'm calling up some quotes that I often give my poetry writing students here, giving you the
Yeah.
Elizabeth Bishop quote before, but also the Robert Frost quote, no discovery or no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. You know, and if your outline is sketched out too fully, there's going to be no feeling of discovery in the art there. That the art holds as an artifact the human sense of discovery when you don't know precisely what you're going to do from moment to moment in the art making.
And I think that harks back to that sense of quietness, because that sense of discovery is in that not knowing. You know, I go to my job, I work a job 3 days a week, and I keep sacred days in my studio specifically so that I don't have to know where they're going. Like, I don't have to have an agenda, and I actually can spend all day cutting a very, very fine, intricate paper cutting, not knowing what's going to come from it. And I think that there's something inherently very, very exciting about that for me, because it is a deep relationship that I'm having with myself, with my sense of faith. I think that something that just popped into my head was just relating to what we're speaking about your words, is because I also had this sense of the book of Job from the Bible in my head as well. Job was in the whale for 3 days, and that's kind of a 3 metaphoric days. And he had no sense of time. He didn't know how long. He didn't know if it was day or night, and he was just there. And that's kind of, you know, so there's this triangulation between your poem, the book of Job, and people's experience of COVID. And so I think, like, in that poetic license, I was imagining, how's Job going? Jonah and the whale. I'm so sorry.
That's all
Job,
right.
sorry. Job had not a great time.
Job had his own belly of the whale period there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Job had his own whale experience. He definitely sat with a lot, but it was Jonah. And so I'm imagining myself as Jonah sitting there going, well, you know, it's almost like in that poetic license, Dan didn't exist. And actually who wrote this poem was Jonah. And it was this experience. And it was like this writing a road map for us, like, hey, been in this belly, I've been in this belly, and here's some hot tips.
Yeah, that feeling, of course, you know, I love it that you said, I mean, it sounds strange for the artist to say, I'm delighted that you said that the artist didn't exist, that Dan isn't there, that that the speaker just exists and the art just exists. I mean,
Mm.
that's the goal, I think, is to make something that does stand outside of ourselves personally. And anyone that looks at it later might find an interesting footnote about an author's or an artist's life down the road, but the most important thing is leaving something that will stand outside yourself, that will speak to the world. So
Mm.
I loved that moment where you said that Dan didn't exist.
But it also made me think about maybe what was going on in your life. Like, for me to think, okay, Jonah's writing this, but actually to ask you, what were the circumstances, if there are any, that actually led you to write that poem? Because to have that sense of insight is, in a way, you were in your own belly of a whale.
Well, I was at the time. It was just entirely circumstantial, psychological. I was at a crossroads in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I felt very much because of choices I'd made and circumstance I couldn't control. I felt very much like I was treading water in my life.
Mm.
I made a dramatic decision around that time to change from one career to another. And I was 35, actually, in turned 36 in 2000. And I, um, I just had so many intense emotions about the idea of feeling somewhat trapped and in stasis, that I was, but the important thing about writing the poem is, and I think I didn't want to just document how I felt about my life at the time. You know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was interested in the emotions I was feeling and the complexity of the emotions I was feeling, because at once I was feeling a desperation at the time, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is in the poem. But I was also feeling that same kind of thing I was talking about the David Lynch idea of feeling like the world's ahead of me now, everything's above me and beautiful. Opportunity was there as
Mm.
well. And I feel like the poem kind of, I hope, captures that kind of complexity of coexisting contradictory emotions. Because
Mm.
when we try to write a poem or make a piece of art that captures one emotion, especially an emotion we're familiar with, that's when we probably end up with nothing but sentimentality. But when we understand that our emotional lives, the emotional lives of all 7 billion of us, are much 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 more complex than that, and we try to capture some color of that complexity in an experience, we
Mm.
maximize the chance, I think, to connect more genuinely with the emotional lives of others. So I was really just there are a lot of things that feel contradictory in the poem, in the statements, and I just was trying to capture that for lack of a better word, miasma of emotion that was swirling around inside me at the time.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I think that it does capture that sense of beauty and grief, which for me really is summed up in that sense of grace, is how we hold that sense of the depths and heights, of the lived experience. And I think it's something that poets are so good at bringing about in words, to offer something back um, as an experience for everyone else. I know that when I do dabble in some poetry, but it's very literal. It's always like I'm very documenting kind of my life, and it is. But when I paint and when I make art, there's something about the lack of words that that's when I have some sense of sensitivity and universality to it. That I think it was last week, I was on a walk with a friend, and she said, Pearl, I'm not really sure what your theology is. And I said, oh, can you just look at my paintings and you can tell me? Because there's so much that doesn't have words in my life. I don't want to put words to. And I think that even it, in a sense, that's the poet's journey, is to dance around and find experiences and words that paint a picture of what you're going through. And I think that in my visual arts practice, I really, I have found a new respect for the fact that I don't need words for it.
Yeah. I would just say that I love what you said about looking at my paintings to try to articulate my theology, my faith, because I feel like there's a relationship between level of, I mean, I don't mean this in any kind of aloof way, but I think the more either faith, theology, or aesthetics is within the realm of someone's articulation,
Yeah.
it's really kind of an indicator of I hate to say this, but the fairly shallowness of those aesthetics or of that theology.
Completely.
I think deep faith, deep art has to remain even out of the practitioner's, the believer's grasp,
Yep.
and you want it to, even as you
definitely
get towards it,
I think there's definitely a sense in the art therapy world, but in my own art practice, of just sitting with that. There is a sense that that it's a disservice to the art by needing to put words to it. Fair enough if words come, but actually that there is a hugeness to actually it just existing. And I think that that's something that I really want to honor in myself and in my practice, because, and I guess, art students everywhere, I know that I can have this conversation and we can articulate things, but to know that for myself it is just the tip of the iceberg, and to know that my practice goes so much deeper personally, emotionally, theologically, outside the realms of language, and that for me is the most exciting thing, for sure.
So the end of the poem, I was, if I could just speak about it for a moment, the final 5 lines, people often respond to that: thankfulness, be thankful that you were here. And speaking about the ambiguity earlier, the ambiguity of emotions, be thankful that you're here, swallowed with all hope, where you can rest and wait. And I've always, this wasn't intentional, but there's that ambiguity of what it means to be swallowed with all hope. That you does that mean you're nurturing a hope for the future, or does it mean that the whale's digestive juices are working on the last thread of hope that you have? Is it a moment of complete despair or resilience? And so this question of what you might hope for to come out of your waiting in the belly of the whale, I guess, is an interesting one. And this thinking of what the world was like before and what you might go to afterward.
Yeah.
So the treading water in the center of the still night sea. There's something beautiful and calm about the still night sea, but you're treading water in it and your toes seem to be pointing down to a void while you're there, as if you're just, as if in the previous world, before you were swallowed by the whale, you were already in a kind of stasis, I guess. So I felt really ridiculous glossing my own poem like that.
No, I think it offers so much. I really think it offers so much, because I think those lines really are that it was like the tenses is that is remembering that you were already in, that sense of pointing down into that void, and that sense of stasis, whether you acknowledged it or not, whether our lives were monotonous, ongoing. What am I doing? What am I achieving? How am I getting money? Like that sense of that rat race kind of mentality that we can often be so consumed by. And that was pre Belly of the Whale. And I think that sense of swallowed with all hope for me was a sense of constancy, of hope, that hope was there, hope is here, and hope will be for the future. And to, so there's a sense of dreaming into a new reality. And I think that so effectively we have had that space of, you know, systems in very violent, shocking ways right now, in monumental losses, in economy breakdown, in so many things. We are having to go, wait, that wasn't working. Our toes were pointing down. We were in a way all pointing to avoid. And I work in the mental health system. I work in mental health, child protection, and family violence. And, you know, this void, it's a real void of a sense of disconnection. And so that sense of swallowed with all hope for me is coming out into, maybe it is actually to circle back around into that sense of quietness, and that sense where people said, like, I slowed down and I was present and I could just stop. Like, and maybe that's my hope for, you know, that people realize the grief and the beauty of life.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
I love it. Well, I think that's probably the time we have. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It was truly an honor to see it. I'll confess, it reduced me to tears the first time I saw it. Of course, just because it's that beautiful anyway. But I'll say that some of my Facebook friends I was mentioning earlier, when they saw your video, hinted at the same thing. One of them shared it on her wall and said, this beautiful rendering of my friend Dan's poem, "Grab a tissue and press play," is what she said.
Oh, and that just fills me with, you know, that fills me with such hope, because even for myself, you know, I have been in this long sense of lockdown, and even to do a stop motion animation, there is no light. There's no natural light in this studio. And I actually really, Julian of Norwich is one of my favorite Christian mystics, and she lived a pretty kind of walled in life. And I actually have to also reconcile the fact that I need to go out and see the blue sky. Obviously I love walking, and I'm not, I don't just cloister myself in here, but, you know, the sense of we are actually heading back out quite soon with that sense of stillness, and the anchoredness of your poem, I think, is just such a gift for everyone. So I just want to thank you for offering the world this poem 20 years ago, and it being so relevant right now for so many people.
Thank you, Pearl. Thank you for giving us your video interpretation of it.
Yes, thank you. All right.